This week in IT SPARcast, Cisco and IBM cut off their noses to spite their face. Lou goes fishing for the CVE of the week, and John calls Amazon CEO a doo-doo head. Greetings and welcome to the IT SPARcast. I'm your host, John Barker.
And I'm your host, Lou Schmidt. Let's go see what's going on out there.
It's Friday, September 20th. IT SPARcast is a digest of the IT news over the last week with insights, opinions, and a little sarcasm from two experts with over 20 years of experience working in IT or for IT vendors. And now for the news bites.
Well, Computer World brings us this, and I think it's an excellent question. Will potential security gaps derail Microsoft's Copilot? They point out that the concept of data access, or how we're going to bring our information into this system and how pervasive Microsoft's information gathering capacity within your operating system is through Office. So it doesn't necessarily have to be Windows. It can pull a lot of information in, and how the default requirements of the system are going to be set out in the Microsoft 365 settings. So they warn that we need to be very careful about what settings we allow. And we also need to take a very close look at how the tools are being used. One thing I haven't seen yet, via the discussion that John and I were having prior to running on this, is what are the audit tools that we're going to have available? How are you going to access them? And what else, what other tools you're going to get?
So, Lou, there's some interesting points here. And I think that the way we need to look at it as IT professionals and the various levels of IT administrators and directors and CIOs that are out there is, who do you trust? And do you trust who those people trust or those companies trust? So with the case with Microsoft, maybe you fully trust that Microsoft's going to keep your data safe and that they're not going to do anything with it, and it's not going to go to be part of a database to help another AI learn, and then that data might leak out somehow. But do you trust OpenAI? And some of us do, and some of us don't. But OpenAI is a vendor that Microsoft uses, Microsoft invests in, but Microsoft does not control. And there's been a lot of controversy with OpenAI. I think a lot of it's probably, in my opinion, might be blown out of proportion, but it's still controversy. And so you have to decide what you're putting your name and your signature on, and do you trust it?
So one of the things that we were discussing was that Apple's approach appears to be that we talk about an AI, like you're going to AI enable this thing. Does this mean you're going to have one AI? And John and I don't think so.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So I'm a big Apple user. Most of the devices in my house are Apple devices, and I listened to their Apple Intelligence announcement back in June very closely. And what Apple is claiming, and again, you have to decide whether you trust your vendors and are they going to do what they say they do, is that the majority of the interactions with AI are done either on device or in a private cloud setting that Apple has set up running Apple Silicon that is anonymized with to make sure that your data is safe. Now, that's great. Again, if you trust Apple at their word, they have opened up for audits. They have promised that their systems can be audited to make sure that they are being anonymized. But at the end of the day, if I'm taking my company's financial records and I'm plugging it into an AI to ask it to do something or any other sensitive data, that is getting into a system that I no longer control. Now, you take that to the Microsoft case, and it's going into a database and a large language model or whatever the AI tool might be that they don't control. And then it becomes another layer of abstraction. So that gets really interesting. The Apple approach, I find, is interesting in that once they get to a point where they feel that Apple Intelligence, that's their brand for AI, isn't able to do what you're asking as the user, it will federate out to other third-party AI solutions, but it asks you before doing that, hey, can I plug this into ChatGPT, which is their current and only partner today, in order to run that task? But maybe they'll open it up to Midjourney or to any of the to Claude or any of the other AI tools out there. But then it's supposed to ask you and then anonymize it as best as possible before sending it off to that tool.
So here's a question we have for you. If you're an administrator, an IT administrator, and you have access to this technology, drop us a line and let us know what type of auditing they're presenting for you. We don't have this set up yet, and we would be very interested to find out how they're easing the burden of figuring this out.
And I think that's important, is that as people that are purchasing, whether it's for our own personal use or for a corporate use, and we're focusing here on enterprise IT, is you need to understand that level of accountability and what happens if something goes wrong, whether that's system, a system outage like what we talked about last week with CrowdStrike and things like that, or whether it's a data breach, or whether it is some other event. What is the response from the vendor? What are they going to do? How are they going to make you whole in that situation? And that's a conversation you need to have with your sales representatives from those vendors. And as we get to these more and more complex systems, more and more problems will happen. As technology gets more complex, bugs become more commonplace. Breaches become more commonplace, and it is not only in your best interest, but it's your duty as a member of the IT team to make sure that you're asking those questions, that you have a contingency plan or a remediation plan or a some other way to act once a problem happens.
John, can we talk about something that'll make your life easier as an IT person?
Good,
tell me you have good
news.
Good
idea.
Tell me you have some good news.
I hope this is good news. So Intuit, the maker of QuickBooks and other financial tools, has introduced Intuit Enterprise Suite. Now, this is something that I'm finding very interesting, and I'm hoping is something that will actually come and help the people that run the business, that's HR and finance and other places that we as IT support will help them with in a way that hasn't been able to happen today. So this is a new robust financial management system. It's got HR tools. It's got tools for setting up 401ks for employees, for setting up insurance, dental, vision, medical insurance, things like that. And running the business operations. Now, these are things that have classically been done by SAP or Oracle. And I've used tools from both SAP and Oracle, and they're very powerful on the back end, but user interface and user experience are not top of mind for either one of those companies. And I've found that every time I've had to log into an HR system that tracks employee days off or bonuses or any of those things, it's a very, very poor experience as a manager. And I know that when the people that are reported to me had to use them, or if I've had to use them as an employee to send messages up, every single time it's been like a task that I just didn't want to do.
Are you telling me that there's a potential that if we were to go out and get another corporate job, that we might not be pissed at the infrastructure?
So that's possible. I've used a variety of different Intuit tools, and I've been very happy with their interface. I've been happy with the workflow. I've been happy with how easy they are to use. That being said, being able to do your taxes or run the books for a very small company is very different than business operations for a large enterprise. So I am hopefully optimistic, but I also think that that we want to be cautious. That again, we'll put a link or a couple of links in the show notes for what these tools are and how they help. I think the thing, again, just as we said in the last article, is that you need to talk to the Intuit sales team and find out, like, if this doesn't scale appropriately, or if it's not as easy to use, or if I have frustrated users, what are you going to do for me? What are you going to do to help? The first step that they are going to do, and I find is very encouraging, is that they do have a customer success team that will help you get through from purchase to setup to running operation. And that, I think, is really key to something like this. And it's a big trend that I've been a big fan of, is the customer success departments, where you have somebody that you know their name, they know your name, they know your business, and they're going to help you walk through the success of this rollout. It's only in their best interest to do so.
But it brings up a challenge. What happens as companies move and they start cutting those teams because they tend to be ripe targets? They're expensive. Professional services is essentially customer success, and professional services margins are not nearly as good as other margins.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that places that both Lou and I have worked in the past, where stuff like that happens, and so that is something to keep in mind. It's something you want to track as and as we get into one of the next topics, the health and the future of the company that you're working with, your vendors. Their future as a company may not be at risk, but their value to you or their responsiveness to you may be at risk. So, Lou, why don't you chat about that?
Yeah, let's talk about something sad, unfortunately, that we mentioned earlier, and that is we've seen some rather large layoffs. Cisco executed its layoff on Monday, the 16th of September, the week of this recording. And there's no linked article for this. I worked for Cisco for 10 years, back when it was a very different company. And we're going to discuss that later as well. And this really hit DevNet hard. So when we talk in the prior article about how the customer success is crucial to implementing these complex systems, they laid off distinguished engineers from DevNet. These were the folks that were bringing it. There's a rumor, I have not yet been able to confirm it, but I've heard it in more than one place, that they're talking about passing off their VPN AnyConnect service to Microsoft. Once again, I don't know if this is true yet, but it's popped up in enough places. They are definitely streamlining. So the thing, and at the same time, we've also seen that IBM has laid off a large amount of folks, in the thousands. Now it's a rather massive company, and this is a terrible thing if you're one of the persons who was hit by the layoff. Absolutely.
But that one was kind of a stealth layoff, and not much information is available except for some information from some whistleblower type activity. There was an interesting article in the Register, and again, we'll put a link in the show notes, where they mentioned that there was a stealth layoff that happened, and they're estimating that it was in the 5,000 to 6,000 people range. It was in the single digit percentages. IBM has 288,000 employees, so even a small percentage of their workforce is a significant amount of people losing their jobs. So we definitely feel for those people that have lost their jobs. But the fact that it's being done under the covers is really concerning. And the person again, according to the article in the Register, their insider told them that NDAs were put in place with managers so that they couldn't talk about what was going on. And that, I find, is very disturbing.
That's really, really bad. And once again, as we told you the first time when we started talking about this, you need to get together with your account team now. You need to call your account team. If you had items sitting in the queue waiting to get done, they've made some major changes, and these are just the ones we've heard about. So some of the questions you need to ask are, what's going to replace DevNet? What are your plans for migrating this stuff? What is changing in your core business that you are currently providing me that might get transitioned because you need to know about it. Now's the time.
And again, I'm gonna have a hot take a little later where I talk about some things that Amazon's doing, but pay attention what the top level folks are saying at your vendors. So again, according to this Register article, Arvind Krishna, who's the CEO of IBM, said that they expect over not that long a period of time to replace 7,800 jobs with AI. Now, the way it was stated, it sounded like with an intent for a net reduction of 7,800 people. And I think it's a real, I mean, again, out of 288,000 people, that's a relatively small percentage. But I think that we're going to do an article on this or a whole episode on this later about AI and replacing jobs, because that's the wrong way to be looking at AI. There's a new podcast that I started listening to. I'll give them a plug. It's the Attention Mechanism with Robert Rustin Young and Andrew Main. And in one of the most recent episodes, they touched on this. And Justin's point of view was that AI should be seen as an augment. He said a mech suit, if you will, as opposed to a replacement android that takes over a job. And I think that's the right way to look at this, is that you can get more done with the people that you have, as opposed to saying it replaces folks. It's just the wrong way to look at it. We'll talk more about that in a later podcast. But pay attention to what the top level people are saying at your vendors, and then think about how that might impact you and the services and products that you're getting from those vendors.
Don't assume, especially when you see press releases that say refocusing the business or growing into a new area, that they're going to continue to support the stuff you already have. If they see companies that are looking for large growth are completely happy to drop legacy customers where they don't have the profit they think they should be getting. Now that we've made you feel so much more secure about your world,
it's time for the CVE of the week.
And this one, we're going to have a debate about this one. There is not a coded CVE for this because it appears that this is a very advanced social engineering attack, but we wanted to bring it up. It's been out there for a bit. It's surfaced through Unit 42 of Palo Alto Networks, which has a lot of, we were digging around in this earlier, a lot of really excellent resources. But here's the net of what this thing is. So cyber criminals are exploiting HTTP headers for credential theft via large-scale phishing attacks. So how this works is that they execute a large-scale phishing attack against a target where they have a pretty good idea of what the target's infrastructure looks like. And then if the user clicks on the email, it redirects you through a valid link or a valid domain into a invalid link or a malware link that will ask you to re-authenticate into the system. And when it does that, it's going to get your user credentials. So that's why John and I okay, we're back side by side. What's going on here? What the heck is going on here, and how do you mitigate this?
Yeah, so this one, honestly, we found this through a different article that was really poorly written. So we spent a lot of time investigating it and checking out the Unit 42 website for Palo Alto. And again, we will include a link to that. But also their LinkedIn post, and they have a GitHub. And I highly recommend checking out that GitHub on a regular basis, because they do update that with threats in the field as well. Again, all those links will be in the show notes. But what seems to be happening here is that, as emails get more and more sophisticated, as email technology gets more and more sophisticated in the clients, HTML embedded inside of an email is just commonplace now. Anything that you get, whether it's an advertisement, it's a notice from Amazon, or if it's hey, you need to change your password, there's almost guaranteed to be HTML built into that email. And what we have found is that there is a flaw that hadn't been considered before and has been around for a long time and been exploited for a long time, where you can put a redirect, meaning that you are sent to one URL, and then within a certain number of seconds, you get redirected. It refreshes the page, but in the refresh, it actually goes to a new URL that looks like the old URL. So you are in a situation where your email filters may not catch this because they think that you're going to, let's say, authenticate with Microsoft or some other well-known and allowed system. But shortly after appearing on that page, then the page refreshes and you're now thinking you're on the same site, and it's actually using that site as the basis for building it, the code that you're seeing, but it's actually a bad actor's website that you're on. So this is a really nasty one. And honestly, nothing that we've read so far says that there's a workaround for this. Lou, we talked about a couple of ideas for workarounds. You want to go through some of your ideas and I'll talk about some of mine?
The thing that the first thought that I have when I was looking at this one is, normally if you're looking for phishing, which this is a function of user training, you're going to have to do more user training with this one. I think is going to be one of the big workarounds. But normally, folks like us who are suspicious will hover over a link and take a look at it. And it looks like this one, you're not going to be able to tell. It's going to pop up with the first link, not the redirect.
Yeah, so, again, the information on this one is still light. So I would ask anybody out there that actually has more information on this exploit, if they want to add color to this, please reach out to us at feedback@itsparkcast.com or hit us up on X, which is @itsparkcast, and give us your thoughts on what's actually happening here, but also maybe different ways to mitigate it. One of my thoughts on mitigation is if you could have your email filtering systems just look for the refresh command, the HTML command for refresh, that makes sure that if that's in the email, that maybe you do something different with it. You flag it, you break the URLs, they don't work, you do something else until you can investigate it and make sure that it's real. Honestly, my level of knowledge on administering email systems and Exchange and things like that is a little light compared to my experience with networking and some other areas of IT. So the capabilities of doing that, I would like to learn more about it. So I'm again asking for those of you out there that have experience with email management to let us know what you would do in order to protect yourselves and your users against this.
And the interesting thing is, since this did pop up in a Palo Alto Unit 42 diagram, they might actually have something for this. So we might, I'll make some discreet inquiries to some of the friends I have there and see if they have anything to say. But you know what? There's more news on the horizon here, and I think we're going to rant about it. In John's hot take.
I'm working to not get too heated on this, but I probably will. So recently, just in this last week, Amazon CEO Andy Jassy has said definitively that they're going back to a 5-day a week in the office work week. They had moved to a 3-day in the office and 2-day remote for their information workers. And about a year ago, they talked about going back to a full-time, and there was a lot of pushback from Amazon employees. And Jassy basically said, this isn't going to turn out well for you if that's going to be your take and you want to stay here at Amazon. So I got a few thoughts on this. But before I get to the thoughts, I actually want to read some quotes directly from Jassy on this. And I got this from a number of different articles. And so I'll, again, put those links in the show notes as well. First of all, there's a concept at Amazon called S-teams. And S-teams are groups and organizations within Amazon that are run by a single executive. That executive reports into the CEO. So just to give that clarity, his quote is, each S-team organization will be expected to increase the ratio of individual contributors to managers by at least 15% by the end of the first quarter of 2025. So that means that they're going to be reducing the level of the number of managers and increasing the number of direct reports each manager has, which may or may not be, I don't know their numbers, so I don't know how many, what their ratios are today. So that in and of itself may not be a bad thing, but it's something that you want to pay attention to, especially if you're working at Amazon. But if you're using AWS services, you want to understand how that's being impacted. The other quote that really concerned me was the following: "We want to operate like the world's largest startup. That means having a passion for consistently inventing for customers, strong urgency for the most big opportunities, high ownership, fast decision-making, scrappiness and frugality, deep connected collaboration." Okay, on the surface, that sounds great. That's what you want, is you want your employees engaged. You want them working hard and feeling a strong sense of ownership over what they're doing. But if you translate what that means with the world's largest startup comment, to me, that translation is, if you're an employee in that environment, run. They're asking you to work harder for less benefits. And by benefits, I mean your time. So they're not going to reduce the number of hours they're expecting you to work, whether you're remote or in the office. Let's be generous and say that that's only 8 hours a day that they're expecting that you would put in. But if you were going to put those 8 hours in at home, or those 8 hours in the office, if you're in the office, there is some level of commute time. And that commute time could be anywhere from 5 minutes to 2 hours each way, depending on where you live and how far you are from the office. And if you're working in one of their main offices in a very expensive area, your commute's probably longer and longer. And Amazon definitely falls into that. I spent 20 years in startups. The majority of my career was as co-founder of several different startups. It's a nasty grind. It's hard work. You're lucky if you're only doing 80-hour work weeks, right? It's long hours. It's bearable because you think that you have a prize at the end. That company's going to go public. That company's going to get acquired, and there's a payout. Even if you're not the founder or the co-founder, as an employee, those stock options have the potential to become incredibly valuable. There's not a single Amazon information worker, I shouldn't say not a single one, but your average Amazon worker will not become a multimillionaire because they're putting in a bunch of effort and their stock options just automatically make them a multimillionaire. That's not going to happen. So the motivation to put in that startup-like effort is not there. So it's the bad sides of a startup without the benefits. And that's not something that I feel like I would want to be a part of.
And let's be honest, what is the potential upside for this? And what are these folks actually doing? So John and I were discussing this obviously ahead of time. And one of the things that I pointed out is that if you go to somebody like SpaceX, maybe your payoff isn't necessarily monetary, although I'm sure most of them are going to do fairly well. Maybe your payoff is seeing Starlink in orbit, or going to the moon, or launching and recovering stage boosters. There's more to work satisfaction than money. And I think we all admit that. That is why we want to go out and change the world. Either we want to make a ton of money or we want to do something really cool. There's a lot to doing something cool. And Amazon could do cool things and hold that out as perhaps a reward. But what really kills me in this one, just like John, is where they say we have to operate like a startup, right? The problem is the startup gets you to the steady state gets you dead. What we need to do is figure out a way to get to a steady state that doesn't get you dead without working people to the bone. We've seen, this isn't the first time we've seen this. Last week, I think it was PricewaterhouseCoopers in London that announced a massive back to office. At the same time, we had somebody die at their desk. I believe it was in a Wells Fargo in the corporate office and not be discovered for 4 days. So what is the benefit? And I think between John and I, John, we talked about this a lot. You've got to have a read on this.
Yeah. So here's my hot take. If it's not obvious, I could not disagree with this policy more. I've managed remote workers for over 20 years, both in office and remote workers. And I honestly have had more problems with workers in the office being late to meetings and being distracted than I have with my remote workers. Uh, whether the remote worker is putting in a consistent, consecutive 8 hours in a row of work, or whether they're maybe taking a little bit of a longer lunch and then working more hours later, a good manager can track the output of their employees. So that's what's really important, is proper management. And I would say go back to episode 3 of the IT SPARCcast from September 6th and listen to my take on how to manage remote workers and how to do that effectively. There are multiple studies out there from Stanford and so many other places that say that remote work and hybrid work is a win-win for both the employee and the employer. They actually are more productive, they are happier, and they have more time for their families, which then creates a circle of being more and more satisfied with their jobs. Now, let's assume that those studies are wrong. Let's assume that that Jassy is correct, and that there is, remote workers are 10% less productive than your on-site workers. Let's just assume that that's the case for a second.
Okay.
Supporting remote work will actually allow you to hire more people so that you could make up for that 10% productivity loss, which I don't believe exists. But let's just say that it does again. So first of all, you're saving money on rent, power, cooling, other services that are required to have people in the office. You can hire outside of these large metro areas. Individual contributors in information work, software developers, IT administrators, and so forth, in the San Francisco area, in the Silicon Valley area, are typically making between $300,000 and $400,000 a year, because they have to get paid that in order to pay for the rent and the mortgages and the groceries and everything else in those very expensive areas. Now, I pose it to you: how many of you are making $300,000 or $400,000 a year as either an individual contributor, especially, but even as a manager or a director? That's not a normal salary across the country.
Can I interject here? I grew up in the Silicon Valley. I am a native of the Silicon Valley. And I went back there after my military service, got my degree, met my girl, started my family, worked. Life, and then I left. I left my home, which was really, really hard to do. But folks, I'm telling you, you want to hire happy people, hire people who are not in a pressure cooker.
Exactly. And that was the point I was making, is that you don't have to hire people in those large metro areas. You can hire them in the Midwest, in the South, in other areas that have lower rent and lower cost of living, and actually save money on what you're paying for them. You can get somebody at $150K in Iowa or in North Carolina or someplace like that, versus in San Francisco, New York City, LA, London, those types of places where, just by nature, you have to pay those people more. And so by those savings from the facility savings and the personnel salary savings, you can actually hire more people and more than make up for that 10% productivity loss, if that actually does exist. So again, Lou and I have very strong feelings on this. We are going to talk about this more, and that's why we have sections as we go forward. We're going to dedicate big chunks of this podcast to remote work and properly supporting it as IT. What can we do to better support IT? But I'm sorry, how can we better support remote workers?
IT is the new nervous. The part of the problem is training the workers. Part of the problem is training the managers. I think that's the biggest problem. And it has been pointed out by Wall Street Journal in a way that this is something that could be a mechanism that Amazon is using to thin their workers and to test their managers. Quite possible. But we are the nerve center. The IT folks are the nerve center. and we're going to be the ones who end up having to implement this stuff. And we need to be going to our folks that we support, our decision makers, as trusted advisors with solutions that work.
And now an email that we got from Kranger, who's actually been going back and forth with me, and he's been a great contributor. He was talking about the small modular nuclear reactors that we talked about in the last episode. And he had some very good points about there are multiple alternative ways to power data centers. And small nuclear reactors are one, but also going to locations that have different forms of power. So in one case, that might be move to Iceland, put your data center in Iceland where they have an abundance of geothermal. Kranger mentioned 360 mining, which is where you have fossil fuel mining facilities, whether it's natural gas, coal, or whatever, that take a percentage of what they're mining and actually generate electricity from that. And then in some cases, they have a surplus of energy. So they then use that for either mining cryptocurrency or use it, again, for data center workloads or things like that. So really interesting innovations that are going on. I want to thank Kranger for bringing that up. And I want to invite you to reach out to us with any thoughts that you might have. So if you have thoughts on remote work, on my hot take with Amazon, or with what Microsoft's doing with Copilot, please reach out to us at IT SPARCcast on X or feedback@itsparkcast.com. We really do want to hear from you. I want to make sure that you also hit like and subscribe, and if you're and turn on notifications. If you're on YouTube, that really helps. On the podcast, that also really helps. Give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or whatever your favorite podcatcher is. That's really going to help this channel grow. So with that, we'll be back next week with more opinions on the world of enterprise IT. Take care.
Thanks for coming.